Hey everybody, it's Kevin here with Molten Works Glass Studio. We are working on freeze infuse today. If you're not familiar with that, this video will help you start that process, learn what it is, how to create those and get the best results. And this is creating different cool shapes and items using silicone chocolate molds. So any of those molds will work. These are some of the pieces I've done. We do also have the molds here, and again, silicone works great. Typing in chocolate molds will get you all different varieties. It just depends on what you're trying to make. I like to do flowers, though they do really work well. One thing to keep in mind as you're choosing your molds is very delicate pieces like this one here. It's too small or thin, so when you try to pop it out of that mold, it's gonna actually break apart. I haven't had success with that, so you definitely want a little bit thicker lines between things. Of course, by all means, you can try it. So without further ado, we're gonna jump on in and get ourselves some cool freeze infuse items made. All right, here is my setup. I've got shelves for the frit that I use. This is a booth. It actually used to be a computer station that I mounted fans into with filters. This is because we're using powdered frit that we want to make sure that it's not just getting into the air and we're breathing it in. I do also wear a mask when I'm using this space because you never know, and it's better to be safe than sorry. All right, so you saw the setup. Now we're going to talk about freeze infuse. I've got a few different molds here that we're going to practice with. We're going to start with the easiest one. I find stars and moons because generally you're likely only going to do one color. We're going to first learn about mixing our frit. So as we're mixing with this big bottle of Bullseye glass tack that I use, the glue, it's a little less than halfway, and the rest is going to be filled with water. Now this is because it's more jelly when I get it, so I want to make it more watery. I know this isn't how everyone does freeze infuse. Some people say all water. I'm not sure how many people actually use a glue mix, but I have found to get it to stick together and have the most success, having some glue in your mixture is going to be very, very important. I've got my little spoons, so that's a very useful tool. I've got a few different size sifters, even the small line sifter. And then I have this little vibrating table. Now, there's different ways to use it. Funny enough, I've also used a vibrator to get the frit to fall out. You may experiment, but this little vibrating table is on Amazon. It's not too expensive. And what this does is it gets the bubbles out of your piece to rise to the surface. And this is important because those are going to show up if they're still in your molds once you freeze it. So we want to really remove that, remove any excess glue and water. So that's what we're going to kind of learn today. I'm going to also show you the mixture right now and the consistency that we want. So if I decided I wanted to use purple, I happen to have a little from last time. Use a plastic cup because you're putting liquid in it. So if you use a paper cup, it is going to disintegrate over time. You can also reuse any leftover frit. And for this, we're using powdered frit. So make sure that it's powder form because that's going to be the result that you want. As we're mixing it, I'm going to just add a little bit of this mixture of glue and water. Use my little spoon here and mix it up nice. Now the consistency is, if you're familiar with malto meal or cream of wheat, those are kind of the best ideas behind how thick and how consistent you want it as you're mixing it. So it's not super liquid, but you're gonna have a little bit of that. If it's too thick, you're not gonna be able to actually get it in the mold well enough. And if it's too liquidy, you're gonna end up trying to remove a lot of the water and glue mixture out of it, which is going to create then more bubbling and everything like that. So with this, on the first try, I've got it pretty much the right consistency that I'm looking for. Now again, if you do too much liquid, you can always add more powder. And if there's too much powder, it's too thick, you can always add more glue. So you're gonna kind of have to play with this to see what consistency you want. Also know that you want to kind of remix it every time right before you put it in the mold, because that liquid is going to rise to the surface very quickly. And then on the sides, I still have some crusties I can add in, but in general, you're going to end up on the sides with a little bit drier mix, and that'll become useful a little bit later, which we'll talk about when we're doing the flowers. So with the right mixture, I'm going to then add, I might add just a tiny bit more glue. Again, back and forth. You can always reuse these, so I rehydrated this. I believe this is the grape transparent. And with the stars and moons, I'm just doing one color. So we're starting basic, and we'll get a little fancier as we go. So this is very useful to, again, fill it kind of in. You want to avoid getting it over the edge as much as you can, because it's a lot more difficult to potentially scrape it away. However, it's okay. If you do, especially on these thin parts, you really have to pack them in to those little parts that are extra. As I said earlier, any really thin molds with thin pieces you're gonna have to watch out for, because those aren't gonna work when we're trying to solidify it. And now I'm gonna dive in, do kind of the rest of this mold, and then we'll do an explanation for the next of the flower, or the next of the molds that we're gonna do, because we'll show you a few different techniques so that you can be the most successful when you're creating these projects today. All right, one other tool that's useful is this little long spoon that I'm gonna use as well. And as we're using these different tools, again, I just got all this on Amazon. I'll try to create a link for this for you guys. But if not, just search tiny spoons and you'll be able to find just the right spoon. So again, with these simple ones, and these stars have some pretty thin edges at the edge. So I may end up going a little bit over, like I was saying, trying to avoid, but it's okay if it does. We'll show you how to remove those after the fact. Really just packing this in, and you'll see why and how we're doing this as we continue. All right, now in this case, I'm not gonna fill all of these. Again, if you're doing this at home, you're probably going to get the best yield. I'm just showing you how to do this. So after we get that kind of first layer down on these, you may use this tool, which is a thin, long kind of spoon, just to get rid of some of the excess. You can scrape it back into your cup. And what I'm doing is I'm kind of going away from it so that I don't scoop out the inside. I'm trying to really get on the flat parts, just on the outside, to leave as much in there as possible. So this does take a little practice. Again, you're just gonna have to work with it and kind of experiment as you go. I'm just giving you the general overview, but it does take a little skill and practice to see how the freeze and fuse is gonna work after. And again, you can see with this moon at the very edges, I'm making sure there's frit mixture inside there and getting rid of it on the flat parts. Same with this star. I'm gonna go on each end versus running all the way across, because then I run the risk of pulling it out of where I don't want it. You know, same with this moon. I can save that little extra and then kind of scrape across the flat areas that I kind of know are in between. So whether you know it or not, it's just a way to save, because there's a lot of excess and you're not going to be able to get the result if you don't get rid of this extra. So anything hanging over the edge at the end, it will show up, because you're going to have little parts after it's frozen. It's best to get as much of that out of the way as you can, so you don't have to do any work as you're trying to pull it out of the mold, because you don't have very long out of the mold to actually get the piece out and to set it down before it may start moving on you. You may break off the little ends. So it's very important to get it just inside the molds as you're doing this kind of scraping. You know, you're gonna take your time. It's not about rushing it. It's about making sure that you actually get kind of the results that you want by taking your time. And with fusing, as you may or may not know, it's all about the prep. So we're doing a lot of prep here. This is the first step, is get rid of the excess that's on or in the molds and around it for the next part that we're about to do. So once I get that all off of there, pretty much where I want it, it's okay if you miss a little bit. Now we're gonna go back and we are going to actually put it on our little vibrating table, something to that effect, because any bubbles that are left in it, you're gonna see. They're gonna be holes in your final product. So you turn this on, it's gonna vibrate, hold it down a little bit. You can see some of the bubbles that are kind of coming to the surface, as well as the liquid glue and water mix that we used. Once we do that, then we are ready to use a paper towel to gently get rid of the excess moisture in it. Okay, we don't want moisture, or as little as possible. Obviously there's some holding it together, and you can see even as I pull it up, I actually am pulling up some of the glass with it. That doesn't always happen, but because maybe it was a little thick, I have to go back and do a little work to make sure that these fit the mold. These moons too, because there's thin parts at the end, I have to go back. I'm going to take a little excess that is just sitting on the mold, and I can fill the rest of that in, and then carefully kind of scrape across, get rid of that excess that I may have, so that I'm going to have the best results after. Same with this star, all the way to the edge, scraping away from the center in order to not get rid of the excess glass and have a divot in my mold after. So you may have to do the vibrating more than once, just depending on your mixture and everything. And again, this is going to be great practice for you. Start with simple molds like this, and then you can kind of upgrade and get a little fancier as you go. So I've got pretty much most of the excess moisture. I might try to get rid of a little more. Again, I'm not sure why. Mine is kind of pulling off the excess. I usually don't have this issue. Maybe it was a little thick. Wipe away, just so I'm down to a very nice thick mixture of these pieces. So we've got this one done. Now we're gonna put it in the freezer. I recommend, I would say 30 minutes to an hour. It depends on the thickness of your molds. You don't want to get too thick. I mean, at home it's okay, but if you're adding it to other things, kind of these thinner molds are ideal, so you don't have to go really slow when you're ramping it up and worry about it breaking. But I'm gonna put this one in the freezer, and then we're gonna start on our next mold here. We're gonna work on a few different flowers, and I'm gonna show you some other techniques. All right, the next part we're gonna work on is gonna be flowers, okay? Flowers, we get a little more technical because we've got a center that we wanna make different potentially than the outside. And these are gonna be the way that we make them look the best. We also have some roses. Those ones tend to be one color. The cool thing about them, we're gonna show you how to use raw frit in order to create a differential from the actual slurry of glass that we create. Now I've got a few that I'm gonna rehydrate, but I am also gonna show you from the raw form what that looks like, just so you understand the process that I'm working with, okay? So for this one, definitely gonna need a seat and gonna make sure that I'm wearing my mask. All right, so I've got my mask. Again, the booth I'm using does have fans, so it can draw it away. It is pretty loud, so I'm gonna end up putting my mask on to do this mixture with the fans. So I will talk about it kind of after, but definitely observe, see how it works, and then we can talk about it more kind of towards the end of how I did it, as well as then the techniques for this. Because once it's in the slurry, the powdered glass isn't in the air, and if you know, you don't want to breathe that in. It's very important. So either have a well ventilated space, you don't have to have the booth, but it can sit in the air for a while before it settles, and even then you never know. So it's best to do this in the proper space, so you're aware, because it's important that you're not breathing in powdered glass. It's not good for you if you didn't know. So I'm gonna turn on my fans, and then we'll talk about it after I finish the slurry. All right, so I got my mixtures. Now, if you don't have a fan system or anything expelling the powdered frit, you may have to leave your mask on longer or just leave it on the whole time. Depends on you. So for my centers, I use chocolate brown. Now you will notice that this mixture I left actually thicker than the other ones, and that'll become clear as I'm loading it in as to why. It doesn't move around as much. I also wanted to show you an example of maybe a little too much liquid. That might work. Again, depends on if you've had malto meal before or not. I'd say the pink is probably the best consistency that I have, where it still is very movable, but it's not too liquid. You can't see the liquid rising to the surface as much. And the red's pretty good as well. So we're just gonna run with this, and because, you know, I'm showing you and telling you, I want you to be able to see kind of the difference. I want you to be able to see what happens when. So if we make mistakes, that's okay. And as you start doing this more, you're gonna learn more. So we're gonna start with our flowers now. We'll start with these two because I'm only using the powdered frit, or sorry, the slurry. So the reason I left this thicker is because this is going to be kind of my centers. Now, you're going to need a tool of some sort. That's why I say that this long spoon is great, because I just want this in the center. I don't want this to be so liquid that it's going to actually spread into the rest of my flour. So with a little bit kind of along the edge, and because it's a little less liquid, it's gonna stay in those center parts right where I want it, versus kind of flooding into the petal parts of my glass. So that's why, you know, we may need a little less, especially for these smaller ones. And again, this tool I have found to be very useful when getting in those tight spots and just where I want it, so that I'm not ending up with this brown in the flowers that I end up doing. It's very not the color that you're going for when you end up doing flowers. So just packing it in, getting it just in the right spot. And because it's a little thicker and less liquid, it's really gonna stay where I want it. Because I wanna do these centers first, because whatever's face down is also gonna show up first. So that's also why I'm doing this, because this is the first step. And you can do any colors. There are no limits. I like to do a good amount of flowers at once since I'm here. So you're gonna see me do these other sunflower looking ones as well, just on the first pass with this chocolate brown. And again, the long tool, perfect tool to actually get me just in the spots that I want, not grabbing too much at once so I don't overfill, because you can always add more. But if you get it in the other parts, it may be harder to remove. So we're gonna finish off this part, and then we'll talk about adding the flowers or the colors over the top. Okay, now that we got our centers done, for part 2, I'm going to add the color to the outside. And because whatever I put down first is going to show up first, I can now add the color on top, and it's okay that it overlaps and fills it in over the top. And because I did it a little more on the less wet side, I don't have to worry about it blending with the things I put on top. So that's why I did it a little more structured or a little less wet, is because of that. So now I'm filling in for these ones. I'm just gonna do a simple blue. Again, you can get crazy with it. You can add all kinds of different colors. On the next one, we're gonna talk about how to add raw powdered frit on top with our sifters. And then we'll see how we can create accents using that. So stay tuned, that's our next step. But in this one, it's getting the center, it's using slightly wet frit. I might add one of these with this color. And because this has these edges, I really wanna make sure that I'm getting all the way to the edge and filling it in, okay? So I kind of got that. Now I'm gonna move on. I'm gonna do some pink ones. Again, make sure that you remix it every time, because it does tend to have the water rise to the top. And we don't want that, because we want a good blend. So I'm gonna add pink to these other ones. Yeah, that's beautiful. Again, malto meal or cream of wheat. It's not gonna flow. We kind of got to get it where we want it. Maybe we'll do one more little pink one. Okay, and now we're gonna do a little bit of red on the final flowers here. Again, remixing, making sure that we are nice and blended. So these small ones, try to not do too much over the top, as you can see, because again, between scraping and also using that other thinner tool, we're going to be able to create or get rid of the excess, as well as our paper towel method to get rid of the excess water that we see in it, okay? All right, so we got these all filled in almost. Might add just a little more. And I also have to, again, now I need to this is a little low, add more in. I need to use my vibrating table to get rid of the excess bubbles. Okay, so I'm gonna do that first while I'm a little overflowed. Holding it down a little just to get those bubbles going. You can see the bubbles a little bit coming to the top as well as kind of the liquid parts of it. Okay. Now we got that water and the bubbles out to the top. So I'm gonna add or use my paper towel to wet or get rid of this extra water. Okay. And then kind of rotate again. Kind of peeling a bunch back with these ones. All right. All right. Oop. Took a little bit too much with me. I can kind of hold that there and grab back the slightly drier stuff to kind of fill in, okay? So if you do end up pulling it off, pulling it up with you, and you see little low spots, that's where you can add in kind of maybe what you took away on accident. Okay. And I want to make sure it's level because I don't want indents, otherwise it does shrink a little bit when it goes in the kiln, okay? And so watch as I'm kind of pulling it off across the top, trying not to scrape too much off out of the center. Kind of go from the middle out because we don't want that excess after. It's going to cause issues. We want to get rid of it on the sides so it's not spilling over. We want it just in the mold. And again, still going from center and out. Okay, so there's a little gap there. I'm just going to make sure that's filled in. And I'm scraping away as I go. Okay, nice and filled in. Okay, same with this one. All right, I'm gonna go back in. Okay, I kind of want to go back to what I scraped off. It's a little empty, so I can take that firmer, less watery stuff to fill in the gaps. The reason for this is that this is gonna actually have a little more density than everything that has a little more liquid. It'll kind of fill those in nicely. And we're gonna see how it works again with practice. This is where you'll learn and actually get better, because making mistakes, especially infusing, it takes a minute to improve and to make sure that you're doing it the way you want. If it doesn't work, you can go back, learn from those. I recommend, if you need to take notes, that you take notes on this. You know, what did you do? What could you do different? It's important to do that so that you actually know what you did before that got you the result that maybe you're not 100% looking for. Okay, so I got that. All right, now this, same thing. Again, I kind of know where the flower is. I'm just doing it on the edges, because if I do right from the center, that's where you end up scraping off or taking out too much, and you'll get something that's a little small, right? Same smaller one, do a little more. In a way, pressing it down a little bit as well. All right. I don't want that excess afterwards. You can scrape it back into the same one. When you do different colors, they can blend, so you want to make sure that you're not mixing up your frit in the end, which is why I'm just kind of putting it back onto the paper towel. This one's a little empty, so I can take again that drier red and I can add it back in because it kind of came off with it. You kind of can tell when it's a little more liquid, a little more fluid. It may cause some issues later. So I want a little bit more of drier frit as I'm adding this back in. All right, making sure it's level, making sure I get rid of the excess, especially around the outside. That's not going to stay. Smaller pieces can be easier to scrape all the way across, as you can see, okay? It's definitely harder with bigger stuff because I'm gonna end up taking too much out of the middle. All right, this guy here, same thing. It's a little wet, a little too much. I add this drier stuff that came off a little back in, then I'm gonna be able to get my extra, make it flat without adding more water so I don't have to dab it again. And that's how we do our flowers. So that's kind of the two-part, getting our center, getting our outside. I'm satisfied with these. So I'm gonna take them to the freezer. Now, before I do that, we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna talk about this kind of mold, okay? So one other way to do this, again, respirator, making sure that you're not breathing it in. I'm gonna do randomly blue roses, and I'm gonna work with my aventurine blue. So as it's raw, you can add some detail, okay? So I'm gonna take my sifter. All right, these sifters are handy. They got small ones, medium ones, and large ones. And you can use a knife to just scrape along there just to get enough out, because it's gonna come out quick. So I don't need a lot, but it'll kind of fill in the darker gaps. All right, so I do that just a little bit, not too much. And now that I did that, I can go back and I can add my slurry to it, okay? Now, one thing to keep in mind when you're adding the slurry is not to dab it too much in, because you'll pull that other blue out of there and you'll kind of mix it in. So I'm kind of really trying to do it from above to fill it in. And that frit that I just added is going to get a little wet from it, and that's why it's going to stay in place. Okay, it doesn't work for everything, but for something like this, it does work great. All right, fill it up. It's great. And a little bit more. Whoop. Okay, this one, do a little vibration. All right, we got those bubbles out. Grab a little paper towel here. Get rid of that excess water. Now, because it's kind of the same color, I might drag, I might lift. You can see, for whatever reason, I'm pulling a lot of frit out with it. So I may have to add that back in, make sure we're full. We're gonna learn a lot from the results that we get. This guy's still a little wet, so I'm gonna grab that drier stuff and fill it in just to make sure it's even. And the drier stuff will counteract the wetter parts of this, okay? All right, boom, get rid of the excess all the way around the edge. Make sure it's nice and solid. All right, and that's how we use loose frit, okay? So I'm just gonna do these few ones. Again, you can get crazy with it. There's tons of molds out there. We're gonna go put these in the kiln after we let them sit for about 30 minutes to an hour in the freezer. That way they're nice and solid. If I was doing thicker pieces, I might let them sit longer, but definitely don't let them sit too long. If you let them sit for a few days, the freezer kind of dries them out and then they get brittle and back to more powder form. Okay, we've got them all cooled. Now it's time to open up the kiln and see what we got. We can pull these guys out and we'll get to talk about them. We'll do a closer shot for you just so you can see how they turned out. This is also always a learning experience. I got to wash off all of the kiln shelf material so that they are clean and good to go. And we'll talk about it more in just a second. Okay, so I've got all my freeze and fuse laid out here. There's lots of good learning things I can share with you as we're going through this. The biggest thing is these flowers. These were the best ones that came out, and very crisp. All the detail is there in them, and that chocolate you can see stayed right where I wanted it. However, the moons and stars did not come out as well. You can see, you can't even see the face of that. It's paper thin. And the reason for that must have been it wasn't vibrated enough to get it fully flat and in there. And I should have added more of the frit mixture. It also was probably a little too watery. So that's why you see a lot of that. This moon here, you'll see a lot of kind of cracks in it. So it didn't actually have a very solid bit of frit. You'll also notice on this one, this is what I was talking about with the leftover glass that's hanging above it. So you can still break them off after pretty easily, but you may want to do that before, because it's going to be a lot easier. That way you don't have to do any grinding or anything like that. Some of the other ones came out pretty well, but same thing, there are some little cracks, or it didn't actually get into the grooves quite as well. This is where drying them, like the padding that I was telling you about, where I was having some of it stick, but usually that water rises to the surface and you don't end up with that. So these were the best examples of that showing up just right and being packed in there, and all the excess moisture so that it maintains its shape. Again, I did it just 10 degrees below my tack fuse, which was 1380. You have the schedule, so definitely test it, and then you can adjust for it as well. You can see all these cool ones. Now, I've done lots of different freeze and fuses, so it's totally up to you what molds you can find, and can't wait to see what you'll freeze and fuse next. All right, everyone, I hope you enjoyed this freeze and fuse demo video. We will be doing a follow-up as we add our members only paid subscription, so stay tuned for that. If you want to know deeper details on this, what happens if I use chunkier frit, what happens if I only use water, and we'll come up with a few other polls so that you can ask us those questions and we can do a video on a deeper dive of this freeze and fuse. That way you can be the most successful. So be sure to subscribe, tune into our next video, as we will be producing at least one a week for you. If you have questions or comments, definitely share those. We're always trying to improve and excited to share what we have next in store. And that freeze and fuse, try it out. Definitely let us know how it went, because we'd love to hear, and we'll see you next time.